The century of the 300s was one of the most chaotic periods in Chinese history. In northern China, barbarian tribes collectively known as the Five Barbarians, which consisted of the Xiongnu, Jie, Xianbei, Qiang, and Di, as well as local Han Chinese groups, established a number of kingdoms, collectively known as the 16 Kingdoms, that came and went in quick succession, although there existed far more than just 16 political entities in northern China during this period. The Jin Dynasty, which had previously ruled all of China, was re-established in the Yangtze River Delta in the southeast, with this version known in history as the Eastern Jin Dynasty. In this video, we will discuss events in both the North and Eastern Jin until 373, and leave further events to future videos. As northern China fell into chaos during the first decade of the 300s under the dual weight of the War of the Eight Princes and the Five Barbarians Rebellion, the Prince of Langya was sent to govern the Yangtze River Delta at Jianye, soon renamed Jiankang, the predecessor of the modern-day city of Nanjing. When he first arrived in the region, the local southern elites were very hostile to his rule, and it was only through the support and mediation of two ministers, the cousins Wang Dao and Wang Dun from the prominent Wang clan of Langya, that he was able to gain some semblance of collaboration from the locals. The two cousins, in turn, effectively controlled the government in Jiankang. After Chang'an was sacked by the Xiongnu in 316 and the last emperor of the Western Jin Dynasty was taken prisoner, the Prince of Langya was declared emperor of a re-established Jin Dynasty, the Eastern Jin Dynasty, in 317, again with the support of the Wang cousins. On the day of his coronation, the new emperor, known posthumously as Emperor Yuan, shocked everyone in attendance by inviting Wang Dao to sit on the throne with him. Wang Dao obviously declined the gesture, although it was still emblematic of just how much power the Wangs held. A saying became popular during this period: Wang and Ma rule China together, with Ma referring to Sima, the family name of the emperor. The emperor's gesture set the tone for the rest of the dynasty, which ruled until 420. Political power during the Eastern Jin Dynasty was finally contested between members of the powerful families, with the emperors usually just figureheads. Uniquely among Chinese dynasties, the government of the Eastern Jin Dynasty acted more like an oligarchy that balanced various regional interests, rather than a centralized state with the emperor in the capital holding near absolute power. Emperor Yuan soon began to resent the power of the Wangs and demoted Wang Dao. Wang Dun, who held a major military command in the mid-Yangtze region, sailed down the Yangtze against the capital, encountering little resistance along the way. The emperor was forced to make concessions to the Wang cousins and died not long afterwards. The new emperor, Emperor Ming, was an ambitious young man in his 20s. Wang Dun's ambition had now grown to the point where he fancied usurping the throne, so he again attacked the capital from his upriver Yangtze garrison. As Wang Dun approached the capital, the emperor turned to nearby vagrant armies fleeing from the barbarians for help. Leaders of the vagrant armies included the younger brother of Zu Ti, Zu Yue, who had just withdrawn from the Central Plains, and another general named Su Jun. The emperor bravely led the defense of the capital, at one point personally leading a scouting mission. He was discovered and pursued by Wang Dun's scouts, and only escaped by pouring cold water onto his horse's stung, leading the pursuers to think that he was already far away. Against the combined forces of the emperor and the vagrants, Wang Dun made little progress and soon died of illness in camp. His rebellion evaporated after his death. Emperor Ming appeared to be the leader that the Jin Dynasty desperately needed, but within a year died of illness at only 26 years old. His successor, Emperor Cheng, was only 4 years old, so the government came under the control of Yu Liang, the emperor's maternal uncle and a member of the Yu clan of Yingchuan, another prominent aristocratic family. Yu Liang again tried to centralize the government's power, this time at the expense of the vagrant generals, and again it was a bad idea. Su Jun and Zu Yue both rebelled, and in 327, Su Jun marched onto Jiankang with his battle-hardened army and captured it with minimal fuss. But just as his success was at its peak in 328, he got drunk one day in camp, got the brilliant idea of personally leading a skirmish against the upriver Yangtze forces sent against him, and was killed. His followers scattered after his death. Zu Yue, now isolated, had no choice but to defect to the barbarian state of later Zhao to the north, where he was soon executed, an ignominious end to the younger brother of the anti-barbarian hero. Over the next decade, a fierce rivalry developed between Wang Dao, who went back to controlling the government in Jiankang, and Yu Liang, who took up the military command of the upriver Jing province, where his family had large land holdings. Almost all of the leading houses in the Eastern Jin Dynasty were made up of northern elites who had fled to the south as refugees. They initially collaborated with the local southern elites, but once they became established in the region, they began to exclude outsiders, including local southerners, from higher government positions, even if they were still careful to not agitate the the powerful southern families too much. The northern refugees typically arrived in organized columns with up to thousands of households, led by prominent members of a region who brought along their extended families, clients, tenants, and slaves. The most powerful families, such as the Langya Wangs, were allowed to establish themselves near Jiankang, but from there they still needed land on which to build their estates. To avoid upsetting the pre-existing local southern elites, settling in the eastern part of the Yangtze River Delta around Lake Tai, which was the wealthiest region in the south, was out of the question, and so they built their estates even further south in the more sparsely populated Kuaiji commandery. From Kuaiji, northerners settled all along the coast of modern-day Zhejiang province and into Fujian province. This region is extremely mountainous with only a thin strip of flat coastal land, and it was during the 300s that families such as Lin, Huang, and Chen first settled here, eventually becoming some of the most common family names in this region. These last names are still extremely common among much of the current overseas Chinese diaspora, along with the population of Taiwan, since large percentages of them can trace their ancestry to this region and this wave of migration. Many of the less politically connected refugees from the coastal regions of northern China, and especially members of the vagrant militias, had to make do with less desirable lands in the western Yangtze Delta, which at the time was mostly wilderness. Over time, they were joined by many new waves of northern refugees, until the population of this region became predominantly northern. This region became famous for its militant culture and strong anti-barbarian sentiments, and was therefore a hotbed for army recruiting. The cities of Guangling, modern-day Yangzhou, and Jinkou, modern-day Zhenjiang, thus became key military garrisons. Further to the west, refugees from the Central Plains typically settled in the region between the Huai, Han, and Yangtze rivers, whereas those from the northwest either settled in the Sichuan Basin or around the strategic city of Xiangyang. But as a whole, southern China at the time was still very sparsely populated compared to northern China, and a large percentage of the eastern Jin population, including the refugees, lived in just two provinces, the downriver Yang province and the upriver Jing province. And so maintaining the balance of power between these two regions became an integral part of eastern Jin politics. In the decade of the 330s, power in the eastern Jin dynasty was finally balanced between the downriver Wang Dao and the upriver Yu Liang. Wang Dao died of illness in 339 after dominating southern politics for a quarter of a century, and without his political acumen, the eastern Jin dynasty was unlikely to have been established. Yu Liang died the following year, after which one after another of his brothers took over the upriver command. The Yu brothers, including Yu Liang, have been strong proponents for waging war against the barbarians to retake the north. And so, before continuing the narrative, let us now shift our attention to the north, which was overrun by the five barbarians, the Xiongnu, Jie, Xianbei, Qiang, and Di. The Xiongnu had rebelled in their homeland under a noble named Liu Yuan, whose ancestors had made marriage alliances with the emperors of the Han Dynasty, and so adopted Liu, the family name of the Han Dynasty emperors, as their own. Liu Yuan declared himself the king of Han in 304, and then in 308 declared himself the emperor of a re-established Han dynasty at Pingyang, modern-day Linfen. Barbarian groups that had settled across northern China flocked under Liu Yuan's banner, including Shile, a member of the Jie people who at one point in his life had been sold into slavery. After Liu Yuan died in 310, he was succeeded by a son, but another son, Liu Cong, quickly murdered his brother to usurp the throne. The combined armies of Liu Cong and Shile easily destroyed what was left of the Jin dynasty in the Central Plains in 311, sacking the capital at Luoyang in the process. In 316, the Xiongnu followed up their success by sacking Chang'an under the command of Liu Yao, a member of their imperial family. But despite all of this military success, Liu Cong ruled over the north in name only, since many of his subordinates, such as Shile, were effectively independent. He also became increasingly deranged, wantonly massacring anyone who crossed him, all while heavily drinking and womanizing. After he died in 318, another coup took place, resulting in the massacre of every member of the Xiongnu Liu family in Pingyang. Liu Yao suppressed the rebellion, and afterwards moved the capital to his base in Chang'an. He also changed the name of the dynasty from Han to Zhao. Because of this name change, the dynasty is known in history as either Han Zhao or former Zhao. The former moniker came from the fact that within a year of the name change, Shile formally established another state also named Zhao, this one known in history as later Zhao. The two Zhao states, understandably, fought bitterly against one another for years. After defeating various other warlords across across northern China, Shi Le turned his attention westward. He attacked Luoyang in 328, and Liu Yao led a relief force. On the day of the battle, the former Zhao nobles leading the army were so ill-disciplined that they drank alcohol in between rounds of fighting, and by the evening were too drunk to command the army effectively. The former Zhao army was massacred, Liu Yao was captured and executed, and by 329, former Zhao was no more. Shi Le declared himself emperor of later Zhao in 330, becoming the ultimate ancient Chinese success story of someone who rose from slave to emperor. Only a few regions of China now remain outside of the control of later Zhao and Eastern Jin. In the southwest, the Di people had established a state known in history as Cheng Han. In the far north were different tribes of Xianbei, including the Tuoba Xianbei, who established a state known as Dai, as well as other branches of the Xianbei, including the Yuwen, Duan, and Murong. Beyond even the Xianbei was the Korean state of Goguryeo, whose people began to migrate southward from what is now northeastern China into Jin territories in the northern Korean peninsula. In the far northwest, the remote Liang province remained outside of barbarian control. The inspector there eventually established a state, known in history as Former Liang, that was nominally a vassal of the Eastern Jin Dynasty. Most of the population in northern China remained Han Chinese who viewed the barbarians as occupiers and looked to the Eastern Jin court in Jiankang as the legitimate government of China. But outside of the major cities, which were mostly depopulated anyway, much of the northern countryside was dotted with large, self-sufficient, and semi-independent estates ruled by the local elites, protected by militias who could retreat into fortified manors when the barbarians came near. But the fortified manors aside, large numbers of Han Chinese still fled the region altogether, mostly to the south, as we have discussed, but also in other directions. A good number fled to former Liang in the far northwest, which remained relatively peaceful over the ensuing century, while the rest of northern China frequently descended into chaos, allowing for the preservation of large amounts of scholarship that were being lost elsewhere. As peace returned to northern China in the 400s and 500s, this knowledge was used to rebuild institutions across the north. Former Liang also had access to the Silk Road, helping to keep open cultural exchanges with Central Asia and beyond. Other Han Chinese fled towards the far northeast, especially into Murong territories, where the leadership was highly welcoming. Many of these refugees, including members of prominent families, found jobs in the Murong government and army. The Murong rulers, like the former Liang leadership, were also vassals of the Eastern Jin Dynasty. In later Zhao, as much as Shi Le was a ruthless conqueror who readily massacred entire towns, cities, and armies that opposed him, he also did his best to facilitate recovery from the recent wars by encouraging agriculture and lowering taxes on the peasants, all while trying to incorporate Han Chinese scholars into his government. Although Shi Le was illiterate, he still placed a high value on learning and ordered the reconstruction of government schools, including the Central Imperial University. Large numbers of barbarians, including the Qiang and Di in the northwest, were forcibly resettled in the North China plain near his capital at Xiangguo, modern-day Xingtai. Later Zhao, like former Zhao, had separate parallel government structures for barbarians and Han Chinese. Shi Le tried to institute equality between the Jie and Han Chinese, but in practice the Jie could still bully and loot from Han Chinese with minimal repercussions. Shi Le died in 333 and was succeeded by his son, with regency powers held by Shi Le's nephew Shi Hu, who usurped the throne in 334 and then moved the capital to Ye in 335. Shi Hu was a particularly brutal tyrant. He continued the forced resettlement of hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of conquered peoples to lands near his capital. He levied heavy taxes and large numbers of forced laborers to build magnificent palaces and to man his war efforts, causing countless peasants to starve, be worked to death, or otherwise executed for any semblance of resistance. Tens of thousands of young women were forcibly brought into his harem. The crown prince was not much better either, frequently resorting to violence to anyone who crossed him, and supposedly having a perverted fetish for dressing up his concubines in ornate jewelry, having them beheaded, and then admiring the bejeweled heads with his guests. He eventually plotted against Shi Hu and was executed. The new crown prince also plotted against Shi Hu and was also executed. Despite the cruelty at home, later Zhao continued to expand northward and conquer the Duan Xianbei, but was repeatedly defeated by the Murong Xianbei, whose leader had by then declared himself the king of Yan, leading to the formation of a state known as Former Yan. In addition to repulsing the attacks from later Zhao, Former Yan also invaded Goguryeo in 342, destroying its capital and eventually forcing its people to migrate further south into the Korean peninsula. It also conquered the Yuwen Xianbei, becoming the dominant power in the far northeast. Back in later Zhao, the years of abuse under Shihu led to famines and rebellions towards the final years of his life. After Shihu died in 349, one of his younger sons, who was still a child at the time, became the new emperor as a result of political intrigue. Another son, Shizun, immediately led a rebellion against the child emperor. One of Shizun's key lieutenants was Shimin, whose father was Han Chinese but was adopted as a child by Shihu. Shizun promised to make Shimin the crown prince if the rebellion were to succeed. The rebellion did succeed, but then Shizun, who became the new emperor of later Zhao, reneged on his promise to Shimin. Tensions mounted between the two, and Shizun plotted to have Shimin executed. Shimin discovered the plot and immediately staged a coup, killing Shizun and then installing another member of the imperial family as puppet. Multiple rebellions soon broke out against Shimin, who initially crushed the rebellions with his superior military prowess, but as the threats kept coming, he responded by issuing a series of confusing orders. First, perhaps concerned that most of the forces that rallied against him were made up of barbarians, Shimin ordered that any barbarian in Ye caught with weapons to be executed. This obviously caused panic, and barbarians began fleeing Ye in large numbers. Seeing this, he issued a second decree, welcoming anyone who wanted to support him to join him at Ye, while giving free passage out of Ye to anyone who chose not to do so. This second order led even more barbarians to flee Ye, all while encouraging large numbers of Han Chinese militia groups to arrive at Ye in support of Shimin. By then, perhaps concerned that the barbarians fleeing Ye were likely to eventually join the rebellions against him, Shimin issued his third and most infamous decree, a price on the head of any barbarian brought to him. Within several days, some 200,000 men, women, and children were massacred in Ye, with many more in the surrounding regions. A large percentage of the people killed were Han Chinese with more foreign features such as high noses and thick beards. Shimin changed his surname to Ran, his father's original surname, and so became known in history as Ranmin. In 350, he declared himself emperor of a state named Wei, known in history as Ranwei, with Wei being the geographical name of the region around Ye. Although he had initially hoped to secure Eastern Jin Dynasty support for his actions, declaring himself emperor immediately put an end to that. Political order collapsed across northern China. Remnants of the Jie gathered around Xiangguo to oppose Ranwei. Large numbers of the Di and Qiang, who had been forcibly resettled by later Zhao onto the North China plain, began to migrate westward towards their ancestral lands in the northwest. Sensing an opportunity, former Yan began to send armies southward into the North China plain. Some 200,000 Han Chinese refugees tried to flee south across the Yellow River into Eastern Jin territory, but the Eastern Jin dynasty was too disorganized to provide them with effective help, and most of them starved to death. Ranmin marched north, conquering later Zhao in 351, but in 352 encountered the former Yan army riding southward under the command of Mu Rongke, the younger brother of the king. Ranmin won the initial engagements, but as he pursued the former Yan army, he was lured into a trap, ambushed, captured, and executed. His dynasty collapsed after his death. The core of the former Yan army consisted of cavalry that, like most of the other cavalry forces in China at the time, was likely equipped with the latest military technology, stirrups. More primitive forms of these horse-riding accessories have been found in Indian art from as early as the 100s BC, but it was in China during the 300s AD that they were first known to have been used in large-scale warfare. The stability that stirrups provided allowed for the development of much heavier cavalry, with the riders and sometimes even their horses covered in heavy armor, and also the development of more effective horse archers. Warfare in northern China, which had previously involved mostly massed infantry, now became dominated by heavy cavalry made up mostly of barbarian riders, with Han Chinese soldiers typically serving as auxiliary or supply troops. The Xianbei cavalry was especially feared, even by other barbarian groups, especially since they had better access to horses from the steppes. Mu Rongjun, the king of former Yan, moved his capital to Ji, modern-day Beijing, in 352 and declared himself emperor, formally breaking off his vassalage to the Eastern Jin dynasty. Former Yan continued its southward march, conquering almost all of the lands north of the Yellow River, and the capital was eventually moved even further south to Ye. Meanwhile, the Di that had been migrating westward defeated the Qiang and other local groups in the northwest, establishing a state named Qin, known in history as former Qin, with Qin being the geographical name of the region around its capital at Chang'an. When Mu Rongjun died in 360, he offered the throne to Mu Rongke, the foremost general in former Yan. But Mu Rongke refused the gesture and instead swore to loyally serve his young nephew. Mu Rongke governed effectively as a regent of former Yan until his death in 367, helping to bring about some semblance of normalcy to northern China after several generations of chaos. Not only was he a brilliant military commander who pushed former Yang territories all the way south to the Huai River, but he was also well educated in the Confucian classics and treated both the peasants and his defeated enemies with respect. Centuries after his death, he became one of 64 military commanders to be inducted for worship in the military temple, a ridiculously tough honor for a barbarian to achieve. While all of this chaos was going on in the north, members of the southern leadership continued to bicker among themselves rather than take decisive military actions. The problem was that because the southern government was made up of multiple political factions that maintained a fine balance with one another, should an expedition to retake the north be successful, then the leader of the expedition could easily become powerful enough to seize control of the government for himself. As much as those in power recognized the importance of recovering the lost northern territories, they were also self-serving enough to only do so if it would also benefit themselves. And so, anytime one faction, like the Yu family, pushed hard for war, other factions would predictably oppose war. In 345, the patriarch of the Yu family died, and the government in Jiankang seized the opportunity to replace the Yus with Huan Wen from the Huan clan of Qiao. The Huan family, like the Yu family, fled southward from the Central Plains and established itself in the mid-Yangtze. Huan Wen was the ultimate ambitionist. There is a Chinese idiom, 流芳百世, that translates into English as to be fragrant for 100 generations, which simply means to leave behind a good name in history. Huan Wen turned this saying on its head and declared that if his name could not be fragrant for 100 generations, then he wanted its stink to fester for 10,000 years, leading to the creation of another idiom, 遗臭万年. In 346, Huan Wen launched a small westward campaign and, after some desperate fighting, conquered Chenghan the following year. But even this limited success made the other elites feel threatened, and so when later Zhao collapsed in 350 and the north was ripe for the taking, the leadership in Jiankang squabbled over what to do next. A northern expedition finally materialized in 353, but the commander was grossly incompetent for the job, and his army was massacred. The failure of his enemies finally gave Huan Wen the leverage he needed to launch his own northern expeditions. In 354, Huan Wen led an army 40,000 strong out of Xiangyang, defeated the former Qin army, and threatened to capture Chang'an. The local Han Chinese population at first welcomed Huan Wen with open arms, but lost faith in him as he dallied rather than attacked Chang'an. This lack of decisiveness will become a recurrent theme throughout his career. Huan Wen eventually ran out of grain due to former Qin's scorched earth policy, and as he retreated, his army was routed by the pursuing former Qin forces. A few years later, in 356, Huan Wen launched a second northern expedition and successfully reoccupied Luoyang, after which he proposed that the court be moved from Jiankang to Luoyang, and refugees in the south be resettled in the Central Plains. This was again seen as a poorly disguised, half-hearted effort for Huan Wen to boost his political ambitions, and was ignored. Huan Wen eventually withdrew from Luoyang, and over the ensuing years the Central Plains fell piecemeal to former Yan under the leadership of Mu Rongke. Huan Wen's power continued to grow over the next few years, and by the mid-360s he was able to gain control of the court at Jiankang. From this position, he set about instituting some much-needed land reforms known as 土断, or residence determination in English, that would dramatically reshape southern society for centuries to come. The premise of these reforms was how to properly register the large numbers of northern refugees. By the end of the Eastern Jin Dynasty in 420, about 1/6 of the southern population was made up of refugees and their descendants, and about 1/8 of the northern population over the previous century had fled south. But these were just the official numbers, and the actual number was likely much higher, because large numbers of refugees became tenants of the powerful elites, and so were hidden from the official government registrars, boosting the power of the elites but making it difficult for the government to adequately collect taxes. What further complicated matters was that the refugees were not registered under the southern districts that they had settled in, but rather still as inhabitants of northern provinces, commanderies, and counties that were reestablished in the south as sojourning or lodged districts. For example, the Prince of Langya initially arrived in the Yangtze River Delta accompanied by 1,000 families from his native Langya commandery, most of whom were given land near the capital to settle on, and eventually a new Langya commandery, known as South Langya, was carved out to accommodate these refugees and their descendants. But in many other cases, these sojourning districts did not even have their own land. They were simply districts in exile set up on land that belonged to the pre-existing southern districts. Sometimes, as many as 4 or 5 northern districts could occupy the land of one pre-existing southern district. In such cases, the northern refugees would live scattered among the local southern population but still reported to their own northern authorities. The residents of these sojourning districts also enjoyed special privileges. They were typically exempt from forced labor, which along with taxes constituted the 2 major burdens ancient Chinese peasants had to fulfill. Various residence determination reforms had been tried before Huan Wen, although he was the first to make a significant difference. The reforms accomplished several purposes. They re-registered large numbers of northern refugees as local southerners so that they were no longer exempt from forced labor, enrolled tenant farmers who were previously hidden from the government registry so that they now pay taxes, and simplified the administrative map, which understandably was becoming a disorganized mess. And like any good politician, Huan Wen could reward his supporters by exempting them from these reforms, and punish his enemies by carrying out the reforms extra diligently. Huan Wen was not the only southern politician to institute tuduan, and after him many more instances of this took place, eventually contributing to the descendants of the northern refugees becoming local southerners. As a result of tuduan, large numbers of sojourning districts were abolished, usually with the sojourning districts merged into the pre-existing southern districts, but in some unique cases the opposite happened. For example, here is modern-day Dangtu County, not far from the city of Nanjing. The original Dangtu County, however, had been established during the Han Dynasty on the bank of the Huai River, and was re-established near its current location as a sojourning county to administer northern refugees. But during tuduan, the sojourning Dangtu County somehow absorbed the whole southern county, leading to this unique shift. After consolidating his power in the south, Huan Wen again turned his attention northward to make plans for a third northern expedition, especially as he now finally controlled both the upriver and downriver garrisons, and former Yan was in political disarray after the death of Mu Rongke. In 369, Huan Wen led his army up the Si River and ordered the redigging of canals connecting the Si and Yellow rivers to keep his army supplied with grain, but the water levels were too low to adequately carry all the supply ships needed. Ideally, he should have either forced an immediate decisive engagement with former Yan before his grains ran out, or at least waited to stock up on supplies before advancing, but he ended up picking the worst option possible by trying to advance slowly and cautiously. At first he won small victories, forcing former Yan to appeal to former Qin for help. As winter approached and water levels dropped even more, Huan Wen's army began to run out of grain, and he was forced to retreat slowly home. The former Yan cavalry, now commanded by Mu Rongchui, the younger brother of Mu Rongke and a highly competent general in his own right, caught up to Huan Wen's retreating army and massacred it in the field. With his third and final northern expedition ending in abject failure, Huan Wen redirected his energy to his final ambition, becoming emperor. In 371, he deposed a sitting emperor and installed a friend of his, an elderly member of the imperial family known posthumously as Emperor Jianwen, onto the throne. He continued to purge his enemies, including massacring the Yu family so thoroughly that it could no longer play a major role in southern politics. It was during this time that the politician Xie An first became prominent. Xie An came from the Xie clan of Chen Commandery, a previously second-tier family that was closely aligned with the Huans, and which built its fortunes on defending the Huai River frontier against northern incursions. Many years prior, Xie An had been a talented, charismatic young man with a bright future in politics, except that he hated working in the bureaucracy, and so retired in order to live a leisurely, semi-secluded life in the east mountain of Kuaiji Commandery. But after his brother was defeated by former Yan forces in 359 and stripped of his generalship, Xie An, already in his early 40s, was forced to come out of retirement to resurrect his family's fortunes. This is the origin of a famous Chinese idiom, 东山再起, to rise again from the east mountain, essentially meaning to make a comeback. Xie An soon became a trusted assistant to Huan Wen, who now handed him a key position at court. But once in this position, Xie An began siding with Huan Wen's enemies, including the ministers Wang Biaozhi from the Langya Wangs and Wang Tanzhi from another branch of the Wangs, the Taiyuan Wangs, to limit Huan Wen's ambitions. Emperor Jian Wen was in poor health, and Huan Wen had hoped that Emperor Jian Wen would abdicate to him, but this did not happen. As Emperor Jian Wen was dying of illness in 372, he did promise to make Huan Wen the regent for his 10-year-old son, the future Emperor Xiao Wu, even writing in his will that if the new child emperor were to be incompetent, then Huan Wen could take the throne for himself. But before the will could be finalized, Wang Tanzhi tore up the draft in front of the dying emperor. Huan Wen could not even get this wish. Furious over all of this, Huan Wen arrived at the capital with an army and demanded Wang Tanzhi and Xie An to meet him in his camp. There were strong suspicions that Huan Wen was going to have both of them murdered. As experienced a politician as Wang Tanzhi was, he was so intimidated by Huan Wen that he trembled in fear, barely able to string a sentence together. Xie An, on the other hand, nonchalantly approached Huan Wen and easily diffused the tense situation. Because Huan Wen still cared a lot about following traditional Chinese political niceties, he could not simply murder his enemies and then seize the throne for himself, but rather needed the ministers and the emperor to gradually nominate him for increasingly important honors until taking over the throne would become the next logical step. To deny Huan Wen, Xie An tried every trick he's learned from years of working in the government bureaucracy, such as playing dumb to Huan Wen's passive-aggressive hints of wanting to become emperor, stalling as long as possible on the paperwork, and then purposefully messing the paperwork up. As the farce continued, Huan Wen, who was already in his 60s, grew ill and died. Xie An had managed to preserve the eastern Jin Dynasty by a thread. Xie An now controlled the government in Jiankang along with Wang Tanzhi and Wang Biaozhi. He was a great compromiser who made peace with the Huans, allowing Huan Wen's family, especially his younger brother Huan Chong, to retain command of the upriver garrison while giving up control of the downriver garrison. Although this averted an immediate power struggle, the upriver power of the Huans remained, sowing the seeds for more discord a generation later. Meanwhile, in the north, despite his heroism in protecting former Yan from destruction, Mu Rongchui was targeted by his enemies. Fearing for his life, he defected to former Qin, where he was welcomed with open arms by the king Fu Jian and his right-hand man Wang Meng. Wang Meng led an invasion of former Yan, now in even more disarray, easily conquering it in 370. Over the next few years, former Qin went on to conquer both Dai and former Liang, finally unifying northern China for the first time in nearly 80 years. With northern China under his rule, Fu Jian's ambitions grew, and he began to fancy himself as a ruler of all of China. He started to make plans for a major invasion of the south, although the story of this invasion, and its aftermath, will be for the next video. As chaotic as the century of the 300s AD was in Chinese history, art and culture still developed, and this period was especially transformational for the development of Chinese calligraphy. The Chinese character script has largely remained unchanged since the Qin and early Han dynasties around 200 BC, when this script, known as the clerical script, became widely adopted across China. As scholarship grew exponentially during the Han dynasty, the clerical script began losing popularity to a hodgepodge of more free-flowing scripts, which eventually became formalized into three categories: the standard script, which is still the everyday Chinese script used today, the cursive script, an abstract, free-flowing script that takes special training to read, and the semi-cursive script, which is between these two. A key early calligrapher was Zhong Yao, who lived through the fall of the Han dynasty into the Cao Wei dynasty and was especially noted for his standard script calligraphy. The greatest Chinese calligrapher of all time, though, is widely considered to be Wang Xizhi, a nephew of Wang Dao. As a member of the Langya Wangs, he was able to serve important roles in both the bureaucracy and military, all while achieving great fame as a calligrapher. He was highly accomplished in all three calligraphy styles, but played an especially key role in developing the semi-cursive style into what we see today. Even after 1700 years, his calligraphy may still seem quite modern, if only because his style became the gold standard that later calligraphers all imitated. During Wang Xizhi's time, calligraphy completed its growth from being just pretty writing to a distinct art form capable of expressing a wide range of emotions. And virtuoso calligraphers like Wang Xizhi began to be celebrated as celebrities. Wang Xizhi also trained many students, including his son Wang Xianzhi, also considered one of the greatest calligraphers ever, and Xie An, an excellent calligrapher in his own right. Although Wang Xizhi was a highly prolific calligrapher, not a single original work of his has survived to this day. All we have are later copies. A major reason for this was because his calligraphy was so treasured that it became concentrated in the collections of emperors and prominent politicians, and so easily went missing in bulk during times of war. He created his most famous work, and perhaps the most legendary work in all of Chinese art history, in 353 when he was the governor of Kuaiji Commandery. That year, he participated in a spring purification ceremony at Lanting, or the Orchard Pavilion, which was attended by 40 other family members and friends, including Xie An, who at the time was living out his East Mountain days. The attendees wrote a total of 37 poems commemorating the event, and Wang Xizhi was tasked with writing a preface to the collection. Already quite tipsy, he wrote a draft that celebrated both the joy of the occasion and lamented the shortness of life and happiness. After he woke up sober the next day, he tried many times to recreate what he had written the day before, but nothing he did could match the elegance of the original draft. The work eventually came under the possession of Emperor Taizong of the Tang Dynasty in the early 600s, who treasured it so much that he supposedly ordered it buried with him in his tomb. He had leading calligraphers of his time create copies of the work, and it's these copies, or copies of these copies, that we see today.